So NBA free agency is finally here, and we've already seen guys like Austin Reeves and Trae Young agree to max deals, but there are still a ton of big names on the market. So in today's video, I'm going to be ranking the top 30 available free agents in the NBA. So let's jump into it. And starting at the very top at number 1, I've got LeBron James, and even at 41 years old, LeBron still has to be at the top of this list in my opinion, because we're not talking about a normal veteran. LeBron still averaged 21 points, 7 assists, and 6 rebounds while shooting over 51% from the field, which is insane for a player this deep into his career. The biggest question though isn't whether he can still play, because we all know he clearly can. The question is where he wants to spend what could be his final season in the NBA. The Lakers still probably make the most sense because they can pay him more than anybody, and he already fits next to Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves. But Golden State is another option that has come up in recent conversation, as they could offer him around $15 million with the non-taxpayer mid-level exception to pair him alongside Steph Curry and Draymond Green. And then there's also Cleveland, but I think the Cavs cap situation is going to make that one tough. And unless something wild happens, I do think LeBron probably ends up back with the Lakers. At number 2, I've got Jalen Duren, and this might be the most important young free agent that we have in this class. Duren is only 22 years old, and he is already coming off of an all-star season where he averaged 19.5 points per game, made All-NBA third team, and helped Detroit win 60 games en route to a 1 seed in the playoffs, and that is a huge deal. He has become a major part of what the Pistons are building next to Cade Cunningham, as he rebounds, finishes around the rim, runs the floor well, and gives Detroit a real physical presence on the inside. Now, his playoff series against Cleveland definitely hurt his value in the market, as he really struggled, and that could keep him from getting a full max contract, but that doesn't mean Detroit should overthink this by any means. Young centers with his athleticism and production do not hit the open market often, and I think the Lakers, the Nets, maybe even the Celtics could try to test Detroit with a big offer for Duren, but the Pistons should match and keep him. At number 3, it's James Harden, and honestly, it feels like he is probably staying in Cleveland. Harden did turn down his $42.3 million player option, but that doesn't mean he is trying to leave the Cavs. It sounds more like both sides are working on a new deal that gives him more total money, but maybe a lower number per year. And for Cleveland, this just makes sense. Harden helped the Cavs reach the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time since LeBron left, and even though the playoff shooting wasn't great from him, he still gives them another real creator next to Donovan Mitchell. And at 36 years old now, he is not prime James Harden by any means, but he can still run an offense, make tough shots, and control the pace of a game. So the question is not really if he comes back, it's just about how many years Cleveland is willing to give him. At number 4, I've got Peyton Watson, and I think this is where the list really starts to get interesting for free agency. Watson is not as proven as some of the older players behind him, but the upside he brings is real. He had the best season of his career, averaging 14.5 points, 5 rebounds, and 2 assists while shooting over 41% from 3 for the Nuggets, and that is exactly the type of wing every contender wants. He has shown he can defend, run the floor, attack the rim, knock down open shots, and play off a star without needing the ball all the time. And in Denver, that fit is perfect because Nikola Vučević makes athletic wings even more dangerous, but the problem is the money. Denver definitely wants to keep him, but if another team comes in with a huge offer, I think it could be a little uncomfortable for them. But still, if you are the Nuggets, you should do everything you can to keep Watson, and I think they'll do just that. At number 5, I've got Walker Kessler, and this is one of the toughest players for me to figure out. When he is healthy, Kessler gives you something every team needs. He is 7'2", protects the rim, rebounds at a high level, finishes around the basket, and can be a real defensive anchor for a roster. And before his shoulder injury, he was averaging 14.5 points, 11 rebounds, 3 assists, and nearly 2 blocks per game. And even though it was on a small sample size, but the talent he brings is obvious. The question though is how much Utah wants to pay him after already adding Jaren Jackson Jr. to a front court that has Lowry Markkanen as well, and that's going to be a lot of money tied up in their bigs. But I do think Utah has to keep him because they can't lose him for nothing. But I do think a team like the Lakers are going to be interested in him, and Kessler is still only 24 years old, and bigs like him who can rebound and protect the rim at this level are always valuable. At number 6, it's Norman Powell, and Powell is coming off of one of the best years of his career with the Miami Heat. He averaged 21.7 points per game, shot 38% from 3, and made his first All-Star team this past season, and that is a big deal, especially for a player who has spent most of his career as a really good role player instead of the main option. And the reason he is this high on my list is simple, because he can score, he can shoot, attack closeouts, and can give a playoff team another guy who can go get a bucket. But the problem is his age and his health. He is 33 years old now, has had injury issues in the past, and he is not necessarily a great defender, but I think Miami would probably love to keep him. But after adding Giannis and then now getting Wiggins back, the money gets real tight, and that could open a door for a team like Chicago or Detroit to try and come in and give him an even bigger role and maybe more money. Then at number 7, I've got Kristaps Porzingis, and I know this is a bit high, but he is probably the biggest risk-reward player in this entire free agent class. If he were fully healthy, he would be much higher on this list. Porzingis is still one of the most unique bigs that we have in the league. He can shoot from 3, score over smaller defenders, attack slower bigs, and protect the rim on the other end of the floor, and that skill set is hard to find. The problem, though, is he has just not been healthy enough. He only played 32 games last season, and that is definitely going to scare some teams away from giving him a big long-term deal. And Golden State definitely makes a ton of sense to re-sign him because he fits next to Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, and Draymond Green, but we don't necessarily know what the Warriors are going to look like. You also have San Antonio, who would be a fun option because putting Porzingis next to Victor Wembanyama would be absolutely ridiculous. And as long as he's healthy, I think he's going to be one of the best players from this free agent class next season. At 8, I've got Rui Hachimura, and Hachimura to me might be one of the easiest fits in this class for just about any team's roster. Rui is 6'8", strong, and has become a really good shooter. Over his 3 full seasons with the Lakers, he has shot 42.5% from the three-point line, and that is huge because teams are always looking for forwards who can space the floor and not get ignored in the playoffs, and Rui can do just that. And he is not just standing in the corner either. He attacks closeouts, hit mid-range shots, and punishes smaller defenders when they're on him. But I think the biggest concern for me is on the other side, as he's not a great defender, and he doesn't always rebound like you want from a power forward. But shooting forwards with size get paid, and if the Lakers decide to use their money elsewhere, teams like the Spurs, the Nets, the Bulls, and maybe even the Pistons should all be interested. At 9, I've got Draymond Green, and to me, this one feels pretty simple. Draymond is probably going to stay with Golden State. He did decline his player option, but he's going to take a new deal, and it's all going to depend on what the Warriors do in free agency, and he just wanted to create a little more flexibility for them. But either way, it is very hard to picture Draymond anywhere else. At 36 years old, he's not the same player he was 5 or 6 years ago, but he still is one of the best defensive players we have in this league. He talks, organizes that defense for the Warriors, and can still make plays as a passer on the offensive end, as he averaged 5.5 assists per game, which shows how important he is to this Warriors offense. The scoring really isn't there anymore, and teams are always going to sag off of him, but his value goes beyond the points that he brings. And if Steph Curry is still trying to win in Golden State, I think Draymond should probably be there right alongside him. And then at 10, I've got Bennedict Mathurin, and Mathurin to me is really interesting because the scoring talent is obvious. He can get downhill, draw fouls, plays through contact, and give you instant offense. And after he got to the Clippers from the Pacers, he averaged 17.5 points per game, so the production is real. But the question is what kind of player he is on a winning team. Is he a starter, or is he more of a six-man who comes in, attacks the rim, and puts pressure on second units? And that's where I think the debate for him starts. His three-point shooting fell off badly with the Clippers, and that hurts because teams need their scoring wings to be able to space the floor, and the Clippers don't want to lose a young scorer probably like Mathurin, but they also have to be careful with what they do with their money. And if another team believes in him as a starter, I think his market could get very interesting. At 11, I've got Jonathan Kuminga, and this still feels like a player looking for the perfect situation. Kuminga needed a fresh start after things got uncomfortable in Golden State, and that's when he got traded to Atlanta, and it gave him a chance to reset. And his numbers with the Hawks look pretty similar to what he did with the Warriors, as he averaged around 12 points and 5 rebounds per game, but the upside is still his selling point. He is athletic, strong, and at his best when he's attacking the rim, running in transition, position and using his athletic tools, but the issue is that his jumper is just still inconsistent and he can disappear when the game's slowed down. And Atlanta decided to decline their team option, and so I don't know if that means they're going to work out any sort of long-term deal, but he is now an unrestricted free agent, and if there's a team that believes they can develop him, he could be one of the better free agents in the market that's actually available. At 12, I've got Mitchell Robinson, and Robinson's value is very easy to understand, especially if you watch the Knicks run to the championship this past season. When Robinson is healthy, he can rebound, protect the rim, finish lobs, and change the game physically for a team. And he doesn't need plays called for him. He doesn't need touches. He just does the dirty work that helps a team win. And that showed up each and every night during the Knicks playoff run. And the issue is that he isn't someone you can count on for big minutes every night. He's probably best when he plays just around 20 to 25 minutes. And when he's in, he brings energy, controls the glass, and gives your defense a real anchor. And the Lakers, to me, make sense because they need size. And Charlotte could also make sense if they want a stronger center rotation, but it seems like they're trying to get younger right now. And New York would probably like to keep him, and I think they will, but if the money gets too expensive, Robinson could definitely end up somewhere else. At 13, it's Tari Eason, and Eason to me is the type of player that every good team is going to look at. He is 6'8", athletic, physical, and can defend multiple positions. He also brings toughness, he rebounds well, and his jumper is starting to come around. He shot 36% from 3 last season, but that number doesn't fully tell the story because he had one really bad stretch that dragged it down. But for most of the year, he was much better there, and Houston knows how valuable he is, but the money is definitely complicated. You got Kevin Durant, who's expensive, Fred VanVleet, who just opted into his contract, and Amin Thompson has a big deal coming soon. So if Eason is asking for something in that $20 to $30 million range, Houston has a real decision to make. But letting a young defensive wing walk is dangerous, and unless the number gets crazy, I think the Rockets should try to do everything they can to keep him. At 14, I've got John Collins, and Collins is a really solid frontcourt option for teams that need shooting there. Now, he's not a star, but he is productive, efficient, and easy to fit into an offense. He shot 40.6% from 3 with the Clippers, and that is a huge part of his value. He can roll to the rim, pop out to the three-point line, and gives you some scoring without needing the offense to be built around him. But the biggest problem to me is his defense. Right now, he's not a true rim protector, and he's not always quick enough to guard the best forwards he has to, so you have to pair him with the right center. But offensively, he makes sense for a lot of teams. The Clippers are still thin up front, so bringing him back makes sense. You also got Philadelphia, Orlando, and San Antonio, who should all also be interested if they want to add even more shooting in their front court. At 15, I've got Tobias Harris, and Harris is the kind of veteran who I think is really easy to overlook when ranking free agents, but he's just one of these solid players that we have. Now, he's not flashy, but he just helps you win. Harris started every game he played for Detroit, averaged 13.5 points per game, shot 37% from 3, and gave the Pistons a steady veteran next to Cade Cunningham, and that matters for a young team like the Pistons who are trying to win at a high level. He also stepped up in the playoffs when Detroit needed another scorer, and at 34 years old, I don't think he's going to get another massive contract, but he can still help a good team win, and Detroit wants him back reportedly, and that makes sense to me because he fits their locker room and their timeline as a veteran. But if the Pistons try to save money, I think San Antonio or maybe another young playoff team could make a lot of sense for Harris. Now at 16, I've got Robert Williams III, and Williams to me is all about health. When he is on the floor, he can still make a huge impact and be one of the best free agents in this class as he blocks shots, rebounds, finishes around the rim well, and gives your defense a totally different feel. And last season was encouraging because he played 59 games after barely being available in the few years before that. And at just 17 minutes per game, he averaged 7 points and 1.5 blocks while shooting over 70% from the field. And that is really good production in such a small role, but you cannot sign him expecting 30 minutes every night. And to me, he's more of like the budget version of Mitchell Robinson, but the best version of him is probably just going to be a backup center who plays 18 to 22 strong minutes and changes the energy of a playoff game. And if Portland doesn't bring him back, there's going to be contenders that are absolutely going to take this swing. At 17, I've got Anfernee Simons, and this feels like a buy low situation that we have with Simons. Last season was not great for him. His role was a lot smaller than expected in Boston. Then he barely played when he got to Chicago because of the wrist injury. But before that, Simons had already proven he could score at the NBA level. In his last 3 seasons with Portland, he averaged over 20 points and almost 5 assists per game while shooting 37.5% from 3. And that kind of shot making for a guard still matters to me. He can score from deep, create off the dribble, and gets hot fast. But the biggest issue has to be his defense. At 6'3", he is not big enough to hide easily on that end of the floor, and if he's not scoring efficiently, I think the fit for him on an NBA roster gets harder. Chicago could bring him back if they like the fit next to Josh Giddey and Matas Buzelis, but I feel like their guard rotation is getting really busy there. But Miami could also be an interesting option, and Golden State has been floated around as well. But I think a lot of teams are going to take a look at Simons in free agency. Then at number 18, I've got Quentin Grimes, and Grimes' value definitely depends on what role a team believes he can handle. For most of his career, Grimes has been a 3-and-D type of guard, as he's shown he can defend, shoot, and play without needing the ball, and that alone has value in a league with so many stars like the NBA. But when Philadelphia had a bunch of injuries, he also got a bigger role and showed he can flourish in that, as he averaged 22 points and 4 assists, and that made people wonder if there was more to his game than just spot-up shooting, which is what we are used to seeing in him. But last year was not as strong. His 3-point percentage dropped to 33.5%, and his role was definitely smaller, but he still showed flashes, especially late in the year and in the playoffs. And Philadelphia may not want to pay big money because of their tax situation right now, so he could be available for other teams, and if another team believes he could be more than a role player, I think Grimes is going to get a nice deal this offseason. At 19, I've got Collin Sexton, and I still think he can help a good team win in the right role. Sexton is not perfect by any means. He is undersized, and the defense has always been a bit of a question, but offensively, he brings real pressure. He can attack the rim, hit pull-up jumpers, shoot the 3, and brings a lot of energy. And after getting to Chicago, he showcased that, as he averaged 17.5 points per game and shot 41% from deep. But the key is not asking him to be your best playmaker. He is definitely better as a scoring guard who can come in off the bench, change the pace of the game, and attack defenses that are already moving. And Chicago has money, so keeping him could make sense if they want more creation. But I think Golden State is another interesting spot if they want another guard who can score next to or behind Stephen Curry. And Sexton's probably not going to be a starter for most teams, but he can definitely play. And at number 20, I've got Kelly Oubre Jr., and the timing of his best shooting season could not have been better. Oubre has always had the athleticism, the size, and the defensive tools to be a really good wing in the NBA, as he is 6'8" with a 7'2" wingspan, and has shown he can guard wings, slash to the rim, and brings real energy on both ends of the floor. But the question has always been his shooting. But last year, he hit a career best 36% from 3, and if that number is real, his value is going to go way up in free agency. He has averaged at least 14 points and 5 rebounds in each of the last 3 seasons, so he's not just a defensive athlete by any means. He has shown that he can score the basketball too, and Philadelphia has to make decisions with Oubre, Quentin Grimes, and other pieces in free agency. And because of their need for the size on the wing, I think Oubre might be the player that the 76ers end up prioritizing. At 21, I've got Marcus Smart, and Smart is all about defense, toughness, and playoff experience that he brings. Now, he's not an efficient offensive player, as he shot 33% from 3, and sometimes his shot selection can be frustrating, but he brings things that winning teams just need. He defends, talks, fights through screens, can handle the ball, and gives a team an edge on the defensive end of the floor, and the Lakers needed that badly, and he helped them right away. He started 54 games, which was also important because his health had been a concern the last few years, and I think the Lakers do want him back. But Houston is another team that I think is a very interesting fit because of his connection with Ime Udoka. But to me, I don't think Smart is the same defender he was when he won Defensive Player of the Year back in Boston, but he can still definitely impact playoff games. And now that he's declined his option, he's definitely going to get a pay bump in free agency. At 22, I've got Marvin Bagley III, and I think he helped himself a lot last season, especially with the Mavericks. Bagley will always be connected to being drafted ahead of Luka Doncic, but at this point, that conversation is old. We know he's not going to be anywhere near what Luka is, and the question is definitely what he can do now. And last season, he showed he still belongs. Across his stints at Washington and in Dallas, he averaged 10.5 points and 6 rebounds in 20 minutes per game while shooting 62% from the field. And the most interesting part to me was his three-point shooting. He hit 46% from three, even though it was on low volume. But if that shooting is even somewhat real, I think his value on the open market changes. Now, he still has defensive limitations, and he's probably not a starting center or forward on a good team. But as an athletic bench big who can finish and maybe even stretch the floor, I think he has earned himself another real contract. And at 23, it's Sandro Mamukelashvili, and he is one of the best under-the-radar free agents in this class, in my opinion. Toronto got him on a cheap deal, and he completely outplayed it. He averaged 11 points, 5 rebounds, and 2 assists, while shooting 52.5% from the field and nearly 39% from three. And that is exactly what teams want from a modern backup big. He also showed he can shoot, pass, and make an offense more skilled when he comes in. But the question is his defense. If your team already has strong defenders around him, he can be a really useful weapon on the offensive end. But if you need him to protect the rim and clean up mistakes as well, that is not going to be his best role. But Toronto may not have enough money to keep him, and that could open the door for another team to offer him more than $10 million per year, which would be a huge pay bump. At 24, I've got Nikola Vučević, and even at 35 years old, I still think Vučević can help in offense. The playoff benching in Boston is definitely going to hurt his market, and teams are definitely going to bring that up, but the skill is still there. Vučević has shown he can rebound, set strong screens, pop out to the three, pass from the elbows, and score in the post when he has a mismatch. The problem, though, is his defense, and in today's NBA, if your center cannot move well in space or protect the rim at a high level, I think matchups in the playoffs are going to get extremely tough, and that is why his next role is probably going to be smaller than what he is used to, and he may not be a full-time starter anymore, but he can still be a useful veteran big if the role is right, and maybe Boston's able to bring him back on a cheaper contract. But if not, I think any contender that needs some additional frontcourt skill is going to be interested. At 25, I've got Keon Ellis, and Ellis to me is one of those players who doesn't always pop in the box score, but he can just help a good team. Ellis is a career 41% three-point shooter, and he showed he can defend at the point of attack, which is a valuable combination. The issue, though, is that he doesn't create much on offense, and because he is not a big guard, he can struggle against bigger wings, so the fit, I think, matters a lot for his next team. You're going to want him next to stars who already handle the ball, create shots, and draw attention, and that way, Ellis will just be able to defend, space the floor, and keep the game simple and just do what he does best. The Lakers, to me, make a lot of sense because they need shooting and defense around Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves, but Cleveland may also want to keep him, but I think their money situation could be a bit tight, and if his price stays reasonable, I think Ellis could be a steal for a team. At 26, it's Luke Kennard, and to me, this one is simple. Kennard is one of the best shooters that we have in the league. He led the NBA in three-point percentage at 48%, and that's not new. He has been an elite shooter for years, but the only frustrating part is that he doesn't always shoot enough. When he is open, you want him letting it fly unconsciously because defenses have to respect him. And with the Lakers, he also showed a little more playmaking than expected, especially when Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves were both out. And he even had a stretch of games with 8 or more assists. And that doesn't mean he is suddenly going to be a guy that can do a lot on the offensive end, but it definitely gives teams more ways to use him there. The defense is still his biggest problem, so his market is going to stay realistic because of that. But if you need additional shooting around your stars, I think Kennard is one of the best options that we have in this free agent class. At number 27, I've got De'Anthony Melton, and to me, Melton's free agency comes down to two things, which are his health and his shooting. Melton only shot 29.5% from three last season, and that number is going to hurt him, but I don't think it tells the full story. He was coming back from an ACL injury from the season before, and once he got more comfortable, he started to look more like himself in the later part of the season. And during one 27-game stretch, he averaged 15.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, 2.5 assists, and 1.5 steals. And that is the Melton teams remember. As he defends, he rebounds well for his size, he's able to make smart plays, and can fit next to high usage guards. And Golden State makes sense to keep him because he can help Stephen Curry without needing the ball, and he's probably not going to get a huge deal, especially because of the recent injuries, but he should be worth more than the minimum as long as teams trust the medicals. At 28, I've got Dean Wade, and to me, Wade is the kind of player playoff teams always need. He's not going to give you big scoring numbers, as he's never averaged more than 6 points per game, but he is 6'9", has shown he could guard multiple positions, and he can hit enough threes to stay on the floor, and he's never shot below 35.5% from three in a season, which matters because defenses are going to have to at least respect him, but his real value comes on that end of the floor. Cleveland used him on tough assignments because he has the size and discipline to guard wings and forwards, and if you can defend at his size and make open shots, you definitely have value, and that's why I think teams like the Lakers, the Spurs, the 76ers, and maybe even the Blazers are all going to be interested. At 29, it's Harrison Barnes, and Barnes would be one of the more veteran players we have in the free agent market. Now, he's not going to change a franchise at this point in the career, but he can still help. With San Antonio, he started 52 games, averaged right around 10 points, and shot 39% from three. And for a young team like the Spurs that are built around Victor Wembanyama, I think that matters a lot as he gave them spacing and championship experience. The concern, though, for me is that his role got smaller in the playoffs, and that probably shows where he is at right now. And he may be more of a regular season veteran and a locker room presence than a major piece of a playoff team, but still, I think that has value, especially on a young team trying to learn how to win. And if Barnes wants to stay with the Spurs on a cheaper deal, I think that makes a lot of sense. But if not, another young roster could definitely use that same veteran presence. And lastly, at number 30, I've got Jusuf Nurkić, and I actually think he helped himself a lot this past season in Utah. Things started to look rough for him in Phoenix, and it felt like his value had dropped in a big way. But with the Jazz, he reminded people what he can still do, especially with the Walker Kessler injury. And before he had his own injury that ended his season, Nurkić was averaging 11 points, 10.5 rebounds, 5 assists, and 1.5 steals per game in the 41 games that he played. And I think that's really solid production for a backup big. Now, he's not a great athlete, and he's not the type of big you want switching on to guards, but he is definitely strong, smart, physical, and still a good rebounder and passer there in the front court. And at this stage, he is probably best as a backup center or a spot starter for teams. But if Utah doesn't bring him back, I think another team looking for reliable center depth will definitely be picking him up. But that wraps it up for my top 30 available free agents in the NBA. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of my rankings and who do you think should be higher or lower. Also, if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.